I call the member Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'd begin by noting that the member who just spoke did not name one real, actual example in his entire contribution. This is all about ideology for the National Party. It's all about anti-unionism and anti-workerism. It's not actually about real people. This is fundamentally a question about fairness and decency. This is about the working conditions of everyday, ordinary New Zealanders who go to work because they want to work hard, because they want to provide a better future for themselves and their families, and they simply cannot get ahead under this national government. It speaks volumes about the priorities of this government, that they seem to think the way to make New Zealand more internationally competitive and the way to improve our job market is to drive down the working conditions of those who are currently in the workforce. That seems to be the National Party's entire approach. Jonathan Young pointed out that 80% of what we manufacture, or 85% of what we manufacture in New Zealand is exported, and we are competing in an international market. And I say to Jonathan Young, he is absolutely right on that, but we will not improve our international competitiveness. We should not be striving to improve our international competitiveness by driving down the working conditions of New Zealanders. If we are simply going to engage in the race to the bottom, all New Zealanders will lose out from that. And I want to talk particularly about the amendments to Part 6A, the vulnerable workers, and the changes that the government are going to make there, because there is no better example in this legislation of the way the National Party are working to drive down the working conditions of everyday ordinary New Zealanders who go out and work hard to get ahead. Why do we have Part 6A? We have Part 6A to stop the cycle of contracting out and constantly contracting out the same work being used as a way of driving down employment conditions for people in those service-level industries. So if we take, for example, a catering firm or a cleaning company is even better, a cleaning company for an office block, and let's say they employ 19 workers in that particular cleaning company, and every year they re-let the contract. What's the main thing that the people who are bidding for that contract going to be competing on? They're going to be competing on labour costs. So every hard-won gain that an employee cleaning an office block gets out of one employer within a short space of time could be taken away by another employer who bids for the contract based on a lower labour cost. And this Part 6A is designed to protect those workers and stop that from happening. So why is the government taking it away? Now, the government say they're only taking those protections away, only watering down those protections for people who work in an outfit of 20 fewer employees. So here's the question for the government. What is to stop a large company, let's call them Spotless, simply setting up a whole lot of subsidiary companies for each of the work sites that they are on that employ fewer than 20 workers? Because that is what they will do. This will guarantee that no matter how large the company is, they will be able to opt out of their obligations under Part 6A by simply structuring their business affairs in a way that they can exploit the loophole that this bill creates. It removes protection for vulnerable workers like cleaners, like the people who scrub pots and pans in kitchens. It removes all of those protections from them, and it is blatantly unfair. It comes down to a question of fairness, and this legislation simply isn't fair. Driving down wage costs in New Zealand isn't a good strategy for increasing the number of jobs that we have or improving our international competitiveness. I want to talk about the duty to conclude collective bargaining, and I want to talk particularly about the ports of Auckland and the duty to conclude collective bargaining in the ports of Auckland. Had there not been such a duty to conclude, their bargaining would have ended long ago and their work would have been contracted out. The provisions in this Act stopped that from happening. These are the very provisions that the national government are trying to remove. Simon Bridges specifically quoted the ports of Auckland earlier on when he was justifying these changes. And of course we know that this is part of the orchestrated smear campaign that the National Party and its surrogates like Cameron Slater have been engaged in when they're trying to drive down the working conditions for those who work on the ports of Auckland. We know that now for fact because it came out in Nikki Hagar's book that the National Party and others were colluding, were paying money that the ports of Auckland were paying money to bloggers like Cameron Slater to smear people who were involved in that particular industrial action. It is absolutely disgusting, and these are the people that John Key admits he talks to regularly on the phone. Not in his capacity of Prime Minister, of course, only in some other capacity. Perhaps he gets Moonbeam to pass the notes across for him, but actually these are the people the National Party choose to collude with. This is the style of dirty politics this government is quite happy to own and quite happy to engage with, and I think it absolutely stinks, and it stinks particularly when they use those links to drive down the working conditions for ordinary everyday New Zealand workers who simply want to go out there, do a hard day's work and get paid appropriately for it and have appropriate working conditions so that they can fulfil the Kiwi dream, which is about making a better life for yourself and for your family. And the workers out there, everyday workers, want to be able to do that, and this government is making it harder and harder for them to do so. I want to talk about the rest and meal breaks, and I want to acknowledge the over 50,000 New Zealanders who in 1 week alone have signed a petition against these changes. 51,000, over 51,000. And here it is. I've got a pile of it. This is only in a week. This is only in a week that these people have signed this petition against this, and I suspect there'd be a heck of a lot more than that if that petition had been running for longer than that. Right. I want to point out that this is primarily going to affect not the unions. This is not a union argument. It's primarily going to affect those who are not covered by a union collective agreement. We're talking about young New Zealanders getting their first job. Mums and dads out there will be interested to know this. This is their kids that we're talking about who are going to be going out to get their first job and are going to find that their rights at work are being eroded by the national government. And I want to talk, for example, Ian Lees-Galloway has already given the example of the pilot working for Jetstar. I want to talk then about another case, and I found a very good case here of a bus driver. The Tramways Union last year raised that some bus drivers in Auckland are resorting to urinating in bottles because they're being ticketed when they park at public bus stops to use public toilets. That is because they are not being given, or they were not being given at the time, the appropriate rest and meal breaks so that they could go to the toilet. Is that the type of country that this national government wants to live in? One where bus drivers get their buses ticketed because that's the only way they can go to the bathroom. I think that's absolutely disgraceful, and yet that is what this government are quite happily signing up to with the changes that they are making. I mentioned before young workers. Well, young workers, new first-time workers, they go and work where they work in places like McDonald's. The Unite Union launched action on behalf of McDonald's workers last year for their failure to provide workers with meal breaks. One of the workers who appeared before the Select Committee, one of these young McDonald's workers, was then dismissed from the company, allegedly in part due to his appearance before the Select Committee. That is absolutely disgraceful. I think those young New Zealanders who go into those first jobs should have the guaranteed right to have a meal break. I think some of the examples that the government have quoted, for example, they're talking about care workers, aged care workers. I think aged care workers do a fantastic job, and if they need a break to have a cup of tea and to go to the bathroom and to put their feet up for 15 minutes, I think they should damn well get it. And I think it's absolutely disgraceful that this government want to take that away from people who are working with in the aged care sector and early childhood education. They are doing some of the most valuable jobs for our society, and this government thinks it's okay to erode their working conditions to the point where they can't even have a cup of tea and go to the bathroom, and I think that that's absolutely disgraceful. This is a question of fairness and decency, Mr. Speaker. Fairness and decency and this government simply are turning the other way, eroding the working conditions of ordinary, everyday New Zealanders is not the way that John Key is going to deliver on the brighter future that he promised New Zealanders 6 years ago and thus far has failed to deliver on. New Zealanders did vote in large numbers for the national government over the last 3 elections, waiting for that brighter future. And if this continues, they're still going to be waiting in 3 years' time, because eroding their rights at work, eroding their pay and conditions is not the way to deliver on those promises that the national government have made. We should be aspiring to a higher wage economy, not a lower wage economy in the way that this national government are doing. We should be aspiring to have some of the best, or the best, employment conditions in the world. We shouldn't be racing to the bottom so that we can compete internationally with countries that use sweatshops shops, and that seems to be the argument that Jonathan Young was putting forward earlier in this debate. This is a bad piece of legislation. This is a piece of legislation that will have an impact on every New Zealander who goes out there and works hard for salary and wages during the day. It is wrong, it is unfair, and the Labour Party will continue to vigorously oppose it.
Well done.